Alright, where do I even begin? Rance 3 was my favorite game in this series. 01 was a near perfect introduction. 02 was alright. Rance 4's story is where I felt Rance as a series began to establish the weight of an ever-evolving world. And Kichikuo is the game I respect the most for its technical depth, for its story that spanned the entire world being a final hurrah for Alisoft. But all came with a few caveats. 3, on the other hand, was, to me, a perfect blend of the series' best aspects, carrying its humor full throttle, being succinct in its ideas and journey with gameplay that hardly killed progression, and when it did get sidetracked, always pulled itself together. So to know it had a complete remake on par, if not better than 01 in style, I was elated, and waited for a time when I could truly appreciate it. That being just last week. A week I thought I would dedicate 2, maybe 3 days to marathon given I beat the original in 2 sittings. Anyways, 9 days of free time later, I finally reached the end. And man, I was not expecting my already high expectations to be completely surpassed. Sadly, not on every level, but first off, the biggest surprise to me, voice acting, which I had no idea about going in. I heard, and immediately my excitement skyrocketed. At the same time, I was a bit skeptical, cause maybe there would be a couple characters who didn't quite match the voice I'd given them in my head. But no, surprisingly. I thought the cast was really well picked all around. Takahashi Saya as Sil and Sakurai Harumi as Kanami fit their respective characters so well, with the latter making every scene of hers a joy with all the weird noises she would make. The only disappointment, the only one, which I understand is most likely due to budgeting costs, but it's such a shame we could only hear Yukaron's performance as Rance during combat. None of his actual dialogue is voice acted, sadly. Even still, the small bit we do get to hear perfectly matched what I imagined him to sound like. The voices blended in nicely with the light, breezy atmosphere reminiscent of 01. From the UI design, choice selection, exploration, combat to a certain extent. It all flows together with a groovy soundtrack that fills the scene between each scene regardless of tone. It's mesmerizing. On those few days I completely dedicated myself to the game, I would wake up, make breakfast, begin my marathon, and right when I think, I'm getting a bit hungry, should probably go make some lunch, I look out the window and see it's dusk. What really kept me so locked is its ability to shift tones on a dime. A Rance staple of always relying on its absurdly dark comedic throughway to get through any problems that pop up in the plot. The stakes can be high, the atmosphere tense. Yet due to how Rance is as a character, so full of himself, stubborn and dead set on his desires, it can go from that feeling of seeing a character you love having their lives on the line, to then seconds later on the floor laughing with his brash antics and beautiful gahahaha. His personality is the glue that makes clashing tones tonally consistent with each other, because what's happening on screen is different from how Rance perceives what's going on. How he continues to subvert expectations of how things play out is part of the fun, in his very nature to not allow the plot to stagnate. At the same time, the game really knows how to let a moment sink in. Now, the main plot of the game remains relatively unchanged. We fight through the free cities trying to get back the Holy Arms, breaking Hellman's hold, while Patton and the Fiends put their plans into action. The events, characters we meet, and how they play out, on the other hand, are heavily refined and expanded upon, as they should. The original 3 came out in 1991, while the remake in 2015, a year after Rance 9. 24 years of ideas and Alisoft's technical skills have been refined over the 2 decades. Their philosophy of story, character, and world building has no doubt changed too, seen as early as Rance 4 and very apparent in Kichikuo. It's kind of weird too, since despite the original involving 3 major factions, Bliesis, Hellman, and the Fiends, the latter 2 were fairly underdeveloped to what they would become even just 2 games later. It wasn't really until 4 where the story morphed from one about Rance and his adventures to that of an ever-evolving world in which Rance's actions bring about change. And the storytelling here reflects the latter. proof of such being the expanded perspectives interspersed throughout the game. Not just with who we follow, but how much more depth and information we can actually glean from being in their mind. The original did have some of these scenes, but really were more so plot set dressing. Who they were, the consequences of their actions, all wrapped up to being, what does this mean for Rance? 03 goes against the grain here, giving more viewpoints to wedge in all sorts of grounded character writing and worldviews, and heavily expands upon the perspectives of the original game. Through the prose and dialogue, we get rich history and character introspection, entrenching us into the stakes beyond Rance's party. We see that not just in the main antagonists with Patton, Nos, Izel, and Satella, but the whole of Hellman's cast as well. And with what I can imagine from my knowledge of Kichikuo and the vague snippets of information from later titles, feels like it's properly building and foreshadowing later events. To see how the royal bastard prince at his immature state will make a name for himself. Perhaps even the fruits of Minerva striving for the top of Hellman. And the moment that sold me, making me so excited for the time when I reach Rance 9, Hunty and Thomas talk before the battle in North. The hope he had for Patton, despite his arrogant, mouthy attitude, struck me in a way I wasn't expecting. Toma here actually feels like a character with aspirations and hopes, not just another roadblock. There is emotion in his words, and the framing of the story takes it as something serious, to really make note of. And while not a huge focus, Major Rovert was a character I loved. The reference of his design and personality playing a part, with the chaos he brought bringing me laughter every minute he was on screen. Which is pretty much what every Rance game has done throughout. Keep a smile that would hardly fade. There are times when the weight of certain plot events got me serious, for in Kichikuo dealt with plenty of heavy topics, though due to its concise pacing, still had that underlying Rance fun underneath. Yeah, the first half of the game pretty much always carries it around, which in between all the main story bits, there's also a lot of side content as well. Reintroducing characters from 01 with their own unique side quests, or simply having them show up as shopkeepers. After Kichikuo, I never thought I would see Sayuri again, but here they dedicate a small area to her. Most of this minor side content, and even the transitionary periods in between the main plot beats, have been heavily reworked to either snuggle in better with the reworked dungeons, or to again, incorporate all the new story beats they have added. Like in the Devil's Passage, they couldn't really do the free roam dungeon crawler puzzle to make it past all the returned demons, so in exchange for the trial and error challenge, they give pretty comedic H scenes instead. The dungeons also give more reason to come back and explore. Hiding within them is not just rare treasures and items, but events to acquire 03 skills. Passives unique to individual characters that range from either pretty much nothing or be a godsend for battles and combat. It always gives a reason to come back, since a character you might not have had in the party at the time of completing a dungeon may have such skill locked behind it that you want to come back for. And all these new story beats, new gameplay, exploration and style, all comes together in the Battle of the Gorge. This big, hectic battle where you control multiple parties fighting through waves of Hellman's soldiers and taking a stand against the fiend Izel's apostles. And it's around here in this latter half where I felt the story truly picked up. Not in pacing, because again, Rance's humor is always at 100%, but in the moments of sincere storytelling that pulled down not just my expression as things got serious, but my heart, strangely enough. Cause here is probably the start of my favorite part of the whole game, Izel and Shizuka's arc. The fiend finding their humanity they gave up in the eyes of the persistent mage who clings on to life in spite of the odds against her, admiring her for it and with hesitance chasing after her to see the beauty of her perseverance. It seems that Izel and Satella to an extent were written with the idea of what fiends would later come to represent, at least for my playing of Kichikuo. While opposed with sympathy to humanity for one reason or another, like Kite or Rei, Izel fits in with hints of his own humanity that differentiates fiends from another typical demon or monster race. Their becoming of monsters was not in exchange for their morals, but due to their weakness as humans. We see this as Izel was in complete despair against the previous archfiend, and obtained power that extended him out of that pit. With Satella, you see hatred towards humans, but expresses empathy towards her stone guardians she thinks of as family. And it's not just the antagonist side either. I think of Sue, who now has a role beyond the Lost Forest, bringing in opportunity for Rance to have one of those once-in-a-blue-moon moments of his. Or even that small cameo from British retelling the story of Jill's reign, and the hell he fought through. I had genuine chills hearing it, as he hesitates to even talk about it in spite of his loneliness, showed his words as salt to his wounds, and having someone, even slightly, come to understand the hell he once knew is against his being. The best part? How it all fits so well in between Rance's horny motivations propelled by his anti-hero persona, striking the balance of badassery and comedy, somehow maintaining the concise pace of the original, while compacting so much more information in between, to make each chapter of the game rich with details that establishes the continent as its own living, breathing world. This sort of thing has skyrocketed my interest in the series. The potential of the many moving parts and the willingness to move beyond its comedic, parody-centered roots into something more serious, while not casting away what made it interesting in the first place. With a weird comparison, it kinda reminds me of Red vs. Blue in this manner if you've seen that. A web series that started as a sitcom comedy using Halo as a sandbox to tell jokes and silly storylines, but around season 6, became more grounded in a way that balanced the comedy with its own unique story to tell. In a weird way, I kinda see that here. The first two games relied on its comedy and subversion of JRPG tropes that hooked you with how far they take some jokes. Then, with the third and onward, shows a world with growing stakes and political tensions which could very well be world-ending. But as always, in the center is good old Rance, this arrogant, selfish, horny adventurer taking the stage to save the day, but not without ulterior motives. How this relates to 03? Well, I think it gives a much better idea of what to expect of the series, and gives a much better idea of the type of world the continent is. That its more serious antagonists shouldn't be waved off as silly punching bags for Rance to take down. That despite the heavy use of comedy throughout the entire game, characters face real consequences for their actions that will have effects many games down the line. That when it comes to the many parts of such a world, there are layers of political intrigue and history that has made the world what it is now, and has laid the foundation for what will become. How 03 brought all of this together is near flawless in the story department. However, there are some problems I have that keep the entire package flawless, and are really more so nitpicks, like hopes for some extra toppings upon a gourmet cake. They don't ruin the experience, but are qualities that would have made the game a bit more immersive. The forefront being the combat was a lot more simpler than I would have liked, especially since I loved 01's style. The devs actually give an explanation for this in Alice's Mansion, being they found it quite difficult to implement the chip system that was reliant on the one-on-one battles 01 had into a game that instead involved groups of allies and enemies battling it out. It borrows some ideas with how every attack has certain cooldowns depending on their efficacy. Around the midpoint, it's easy to find one strat that carries you through the entire game. Personally, I loaded up on as much AoE skills as I could with 1 or 2 Rance skills and got through most of it with little difficulty. It was only for a couple bosses where I felt the need to switch out a couple skills for defense and healing. The dungeon exploring aspect though, I loved in its entirety still. And the other small nitpick I stumbled upon was the variety of art. I can't lie, it's hard to complain when you have so many quality HCGs by Gyulkai, but out of the 8 CG pages, roughly 1.5 were non-H, and most of those make up action CGs. Scenes of iconic moments, maybe one of the few scenes with Aizel and Shizuka like in the original, even some basic depictions of the Liberation Army headquarters, or just some silly ones like in 01 would have been really nice to have. In a similar vein, sprite variation was a bit lacking. Weirdly so. So many times does Syl cry or Konami yelp in anger and embarrassment at Rance's abuse, and there they are, happy, or in the latter's case, uncaring. Meanwhile, Lola and a few shopkeepers with only minutes of screen time have multiple. It's one of those things where the writing and voice work more than cover for it, but again, just 1 or 2 more for some major characters would have been the cherry on top. Even with these minor issues, I don't think it's a stretch to call it one of the best remakes I've played. It exudes respect for the original game, and instead of adding padding that distracts or bloats the fine edges, compacts the rich history of the continent within, to create an expansive game that holds true to Rance's soul while giving the well-needed love and deep foundation to the rest of the world. From the beginning to the end, it was a blast all the way through, and has been a big motivator for me to continue on with the games without the usual breaks I've taken in between. While editing the video, I've beaten Rance 5D and started 6, and I just have to say, I already miss the voices. No matter how low the odds, it makes me want more voiced content, like a special DLC for a Rance X anniversary milestone, or, you know, similar remake treatment for Rance 4, Alisoft, please? Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. Later.